understand what they mean in our lifetimes or in our own lives. We often talk about Imam Hussein's life, and we say that his life and what he went through and his martyrdom in Karbala teaches us to be patient. Teaches us to be patient. This is true. It teaches us patience. It teaches us forbearance. It teaches us to be wise. It teaches us to be steadfast in difficulty. All of these things are true and can be proven through the events of Karbala. There is no doubt about this. However, that is not the greatest lesson of Karbala. It's not the greatest lesson of Karbala. All of these events are true from the life of Imam Hussain. Patience, fortitude, foresight, resilience, all of these lessons are true. But the greatest lesson that we learn from Karbala, and we should be very clear in stating this, or reminding people of this, reminding ourselves of this, is the lesson of sacrifice. That's the greatest lesson of Karbala, because that's what he did. It was a sacrifice in the end. That's what it was, and it's sometimes deeply emotional to consider and to think about it, but that's what happened, and we will establish that it was a sacrifice. In the Quran, the verse that I mentioned, it's not always mentioned related to the events of Karbala, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ. So we will test you. We have Dr Musharraf Hussain, al-Azhari, who's just blessed us with his presence in this gathering, and he's done a translation of the Quran, so I should be alert in terms of how I'm translating these verses, these ayat of the Quran. But let's say we will test you, put you in an ibtila, right? A trial. لَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ. This shay here in Arabic grammar is an indefinite noun. Try not to speak too much about Arabic grammar, but the ulama here will understand. It's an indefinite noun, what we call a nakira in Arabic. Right? Bishay'in. It's not a marifa, it's not a shay, it's not bishay, it's bishay'in nakira. And a nakira has various purposes. I mean, normal people just read it as being an indefinite noun. But if you go deeper into some of our books, they will say and discuss that there are various features or usages of the nakira as a rhetorical device as well, the indefinite noun. And it's indicated by this tanween, which you can see bishay'in. And sometimes this nakira, this indefinite noun, can mean that the greatness of the noun is meant in this, right? The greatness of what is being described as the shay. Sometimes it's the opposite, by saying it's describing something little, something small of that, which we call taqleed. So it can be ta'zeem, it can be taqleed. In this particular instance, some of the mufassirun, such as Imam al-Nasafi, great mufassir, one of his works taught in our curriculum of Dr Nizami is an advanced tafsir, quite abbreviated, but it's deeply meaningful, a very scholarly tafsir regarding tanzeel. So he says regarding this, بِشَيْءٍ بِقَلِيلٍ مِنْ كُلِّ وَاحِدَةٍ مِنْ هَذِهِ الْبَلَايَا. So it means here just a little of the following bala, which is going to be mentioned in the ayah, which is what? Min al-khawfi, from fear. We will be tested and trialed through what? Through khawf, jaw, hunger. So from fear, from hunger, from loss in wealth, loss in wealth, from death. Right? This is a trial for us. And also, we said a depreciation of wealth and also of children. Or you could take this metaphorically of saying, thamarat here means that any produce, for example, that you've harvested, any effort that you've made to make produce, to earn wealth, loss in this terms as well, thamarat. So in all of these areas we will be tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the verse says, and give glad tidings to the believers. If you look at all of these ayat, in fact, from where it begins, I think it's from 153 taqriban, and it goes on to about 157, 158 in Surah Al-Baqarah. All of these ayat, if you read them, they relate very closely to the life of Imam Hussain radiallahu ta'ala. We'll try to mention some of them. We don't have too much time left, so I won't maybe not get through all of them. So if you look at the life of Imam Hussain, he sacrificed all of these things in different ways. He was tested in all of these ways. First of all, he had to leave his homeland. Not specifically mentioned in the ayat that I mentioned here, but a major trial and test is having to leave your homeland and make a hijrah. So we know that in the month of Rajab, he left al-Madinatul Munawwara to al-Makkatul Mukarramah. He made the hijrah. And he stays there for about 4 months and 10 days, just over 4 months. And when it comes to in the month of Dhul Hijjah, on the 8th of Dhul Hijjah, he leaves Makkah and steps out. And why did he leave Makkah? Because he did not want anything untoward to happen to the Haramain Sharifain of Medina and Makkah. He thought, if I do not leave here, then Yazid and his armies are going to attack the two blessed cities. And in order for them not to be desecrated, I will leave myself instead. For fear of desecration of Medina and Makkah. Afterwards, by the way, it didn't happen as well. The events of Harra, which are very tragic, happened after the time of Imam Hussain. And that's a whole other topic in itself. So he left. And when you leave home, I mean, we know, for people who have experienced this kind of hijrah, that it's a very difficult thing. Many of us probably in this room are about to move from one place to another. Where I'm actually from, which is Manchester, when I had to leave for my job, as our brother was kindly introducing there with the generous words, had to leave for Exeter to another city to work, which was in the same country, I found it very difficult. Because you leave your community, you leave your family, you leave your home, you leave your friends, and all that you are accustomed to in that area for another strange city. So imagine what Imam Hussain had to do was to leave the most blessed places on this earth, and he had to set out and leave Makkah. He left his home. He gave that sacrifice. How many of us are willing to do this? And this was purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he made the hijrah, the migration. In the way the Prophet ﷺ made a hijrah from Makkah to Medina. Again, this is a trial that could befall any of us. And there are hadith about the fadl of doing the hijrah. The ayah, which is called the ayat al-hijrah in the Quran, which is the hijrah, the obligation to migrate from Makkah to Medina, had become mansukh, the scholars say. But that ayah, it's one of those instances where an ayah could be abrogated, mansukh, but it can become active again if the need arises. If the need arises and the Muslims are oppressed, the wujub al-hijrah can reactivate again each time, if there's oppression at stake or for some other reasons based on a qiyas. So Imam Hussain leaves Makkah and then he heads out in order to save the sanctity of those two holy cities. So he leaves his home. We're not going to give the details of the events of Karbala because I think that's going to be one of the other talks in this series. But they go through thirst, they go through hunger, they go through all of those difficulties in a journey that one does, but in very, very difficult circumstances. And then he gives the ultimate sacrifice, which is the sacrifice of his family members and the sacrifice of himself. He gives the sacrifice of himself, of which there is no greater sacrifice once you have given yourself. All purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he decided and he accepted the orders of Yazid, which was simply to take the oath of allegiance with Yazid, then Imam Hussain would have lived a very comfortable life. And he would have been blessed. He would have been given, let's say it's the wrong word there, he would have been given by the ruling authorities all that he wished for this dunya. All that he wished for this dunya. But he did not give that a single thought. In today's age, we see our people, just for a little bit of material gain or wealth, they will do the opposite. They will do away with their principles, and instead they will chase that small material gain. Whereas Imam Hussain did the opposite. He left the riches of this world that he was being offered by Yazid, because he was the son, and we said we can say the son, the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, which was the ultimate prize for Yazid, that he was the bay'ah. He left all of the riches that would be offered to him, and instead took the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sacrificed himself to that degree. We in our lives cannot even sacrifice a little bit for the sake of the deen. And for just a small bit of greed, we give away so much. But for Imam Hussain, the most important thing was his principles. He did not make any compromise on those foundational principles, and instead he gave his life. Why? People think, this is what I was mentioning at the beginning, about patience, about sabr, about forbearance. These lessons we learn in Karbala along the journey. But it wasn't the ultimate lesson. The ultimate lesson was one of sacrifice. Why? Because one might say, you could be patient, and although you are seeing something happening in front of you that you dislike or that is wrong, you let it pass. Someone may assume that this is a kind of patience here. But at this maqam, patience is not a virtue. As you know the saying, patience is a virtue. Patience at this maqam, or in this instance, is not a virtue, but it's a defect. It's a problem. Because at this instance, what is the azima? What is the thing to do? And that's why some people say, yeah, but not everybody went out against Yazid, or not everybody, some people took, accepted his orders. But this is not the azima in this case. The azima here is to not do that, and to, in fact, not give up your principles and go all the way with it, even if that means to sacrifice yourself. And why could he not do that? One of the things that we often ignore or don't remember is who Yazid actually was. This was not in any way whatsoever a power struggle. Right? That Imam Hussain was doing this for power. Imam Hussain had no intention, desire to have the leadership. It was simply a case that he could not accept this tyrannical ruler to be the authority over the Muslims, because he was not befitting to be the ruler over the Muslims. A tyrant as he was. In fact, as Imam Hussain says in his khutbah, there are many khutbahs by the way, if you think that he left Dhul Hijjah, if you remember, on the 8th dates of the sacred month of Dhul Hijjah, just before the day of Arafah, and he arrives in Muharram on the 7th, this is almost a month period. The total journey that he has is about 4 months and 10 days into Karbala, if you add it all up from when he leaves his home. There are 30 different manazir where Imam Hussain stops. 30 different places, stations. And at each of those stops, there are 30 different sermons. 30 different sermons. There's not just one sermon. Some people say, this is the sermon of Imam Hussain. Yes, it is a sermon of Imam Hussain. But there's not just one. There are 30 different ones, and each of them have lessons for us. Each of them contain pearls of wisdom, and each of those tell us more and more about the mission of Imam Hussain on this journey that he's on. And one of them I will read for you here, because I've noted it down. This one is from Tarikh Tabari, which is one of the most important works of history that we have in our historical works. You can find these sermons mentioned in many works in Islamic history. And as I was mentioning, some of the first documented history that we have in Islam is actually about Karbala. That's how important it is. So the documentation of Islamic history, when you see in abundance, one of the things that Islamic chroniclers focused on were the events of Karbala. That tells you its significance. Right? That they were really interested. They considered it very important to chronicle, to write, to record and preserve the events of Karbala. That's why we have such detail, including the sermons, every station, every place where Imam Hussain stopped. So that's why, again, what we are doing today is we are, again, in that same line of tradition, those people that documented the details of the events of Karbala and everything that led up to it, we are doing it in a sermon today. In the way that the Prophet ﷺ foretold it, we are trying to fulfill that sunnah and do that in front of you today. So here is one of them, the khutbah that he gave. And this is from Tariq Tabri. I won't read the whole khutbah out, but just to give you an idea of why Imam Hussain did what he did. In case people don't understand, that what was the need to sacrifice his children, himself, his homeland, his land, his property, everything that he had. So this is from Tariq Tabri. Inna Husayna alayhi salam. Alayhi salam, by the way, is in mentioned by Tabari. Some people have a bit of a reaction if you use alayhi salam. If you look at Imam al-Bukhari and all the old works, for the Ahlul Bayt they use the word alayhi salam. This is from the Ahlul Sunnah way, so don't worry about if it's used. Khataba ashabahu wa ashab al-khurri. So this is the khutbah that he gave to his own companions and the companions of Hur, the one who switched his side, in a place called Bayda, al-Bayda. فَحَمِدَ اللَّهَ. I'm trying to give you this, so I thought, because Dr Munisa told me that here we try to do a lot of education, we do dars hadith, so I thought, as way of education or teaching, we will give you some actual historical record in the Arabic, and we will try to translate as we go along. So فَحَمِدَ اللَّهَ. So he does the khutbah in which we start, and he starts with praising Allah, وَأَثْنَى عَلَيْهِ, and giving the thana of Allah. ثُمَّ قَالَ أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ, addresses the people. So he's addressing his own companions and those of the enemies of the opposition who were there to stop him. He says, أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ إِنَّ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ. That verily the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, peace be upon him and his family, قال. He begins with the hadith of his noble grandfather, in which he says, Man ra'a sultanan ja'iran, whoever of you sees a tyrannical ruler, an oppressive ruler, mustahillan li huramillah, and he makes halal that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden. In other words, he doesn't just do haram. This is a distinction, right? Somebody who commits haram, but somebody that makes what is haram into halal. Nakithan li ahadillah, who severs his contract, his covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, mukhalifan li sunnati rasulillah, and who opposes the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Ya'malu fi ibadillahi bil ithmi wal udwan, and he deals with the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with sin and transgressions, with dhulm, with oppression. فَلَمْ يُغَيِّرْ عَلَيْهِ بِفِعْلٍ وَلَا قَوْلٍ. And that individual then, whilst seeing this, that goes back to the man, which we mentioned, whoever so, that individual, whoever sees this, does not attempt to change that, either with their speech or with their tongue, right? By action or by speech. It's a bit like similar to the hadith that we know, Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi wa in lam yastati' fa bi lisanihi ila akhirih. So it's similar to this concept here. Kana haqqan 'ala Allahi an yudkhilahu madkhalahu. If somebody does not attempt to even do this with their hand or with their tongue, then it becomes onto its becoming of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than to what? To place that individual in the same place of hellfire that the zalim ruler will be in. The person will find their abode in the same place as that tyrant. Allah wa inna ha'ula'i qad lazimu ta'at ash-shaytani wa taraku ta'at ar-rahman wa azharu fasada wa atallu al-hududa wa astaktharu bil-fay'i wa ahallu haram Allahi wa haramu halalahu wa ana ahaqqu min ghayyara. So he says here that this is an individual here, that him, in other words Yazid and his people, what have they done? They have suspended the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have embezzled the mal and the booty which belongs to all of the Muslims, and they have made halal what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made haram, and vice versa. So this is what Imam Hussain was up against. How could he have given the oath of allegiance to an individual that changes the deen of his noble grandfather? Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. This was something that was not possible for Imam Hussain to do. So he went to the extent of sacrificing even his own life because he could not give the oath of allegiance to this individual. That's why to be silent in these circumstances. In one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ has referred to a person as shaitan akhras, right? As somebody who is a dumb devil, Satan, right? Who does not speak in the face of tyranny, or who just goes quiet and goes along with it. And that's why in this ayah which I mentioned, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He will trial you with all of these things. And these things are referred to as what? By the Mufassirun, these are balaya, khawf, ju', naqsim min al-amwal, amwat, death, wa thamarat. These are all from the ibtila which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts you in, and these are from what we call the balaya. And it's really also interesting, this name Karbala, which we call Karbala. There was a point in Imam Hussein's life in which he crossed by the plains of Karbala. Just before that, I should mention, when the Prophet ﷺ referred to this land, when the angel came to him, we have different narrations. In some of them, it was an angel that the Prophet ﷺ said, I had never seen before, that came to me. In one of them, you have the narration of Malakul Matar, that the angel of rain came to him. You have the angel Ibrahim in some of the narrations. All of these could be true at the same time. All of these could be true at the same time. In these ones, the Prophet ﷺ has talked about that your grandson, Imam al-Hussein, will be martyred Bishatt al-Furat, in one of them. The other one has Bimakan al-Taf. In one, Karbala is mentioned, but once when Imam Hussein is going past this place, he said, what is this place where I'm crossing by? This is Imam Hussein. And they said, this place is called Karbala. And when Imam Hussein looks at it, he does like tajazzi of this, he puts it into pieces, right? Tarkeeb. Or tarkeeb of this land. He says, هَذِهِ أَرْضُ كَرْبٍ وَبَلَاءٍ. This is a land of karb and bala. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ. Think about the verse. All of these balaya, and Imam Hussein refers to this land of a place of karb as a place of difficulty. And bala of what? وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ. Of ibtila, of bala, is this place. We don't have much time left, so I'm going to finish on a couple of things which I wanted to say about the lessons of Karbala. So the ultimate lesson we learn from it is that Muslims, we don't sacrifice our principles. Right? If the deen is changing around us, we don't just go with whatever everybody's saying, or what we are seeing in popular culture, what we are seeing on the media, or even more dangerous possibly in social media. But we resist and we stick to the teachings of the Quran and the Messenger of the Prophet ﷺ, and we do not compromise and sacrifice in these areas. Compromise can be done. We can live practical lives, But in certain areas, when it comes to the essence of the deen and its foundations, we don't compromise. And Allama Iqbal puts these in very beautiful verses. I think we'll end on this. There was some other hadith which I wanted to mention, but the time has gone quicker than I expected here. So Allama Iqbal puts this into verse in some very beautiful verses. And he says, Ta qayamat, about Imam Hussain. What did he do? Istibdad kar. Right? Qata istibdad kar. Ta qayamat, qata istibdad kar. Till the day of judgment, till the final day, Imam Hussain has severed oppression and tyranny. And what does he mean by this? It doesn't mean that there will never be any tyranny again, but the level of tyranny which was there to change the religion and make people lose their faith, Imam Hussain had severed that threat. And that's why when they say, Haqqa ki bina la ilaha asla Hussain, oh, how could Khwaja Sahib rahmatullah say this verse? Look at the meaning, that is the foundation of, this is what it means. He saved the faith of people. And then he says, Moje khune u chaman ijad kar. And the purity of his blood, this is a very beautiful verse. I was just reading on the way to with my friend actually, I got emotional reading it. And the purity of his blood will cultivate the garden. So what we think is Imam Hussein's blood has dropped, this martyrdom. You know, to say Qatl Hussain in Asl mein mar gayi Yazid, Islam zinda hota hai har Karbala ke baad. That the dropping of Imam Hussein's blood on the plains of Karbala is not death in the way that we think. In fact, it's the rising of a garden, the gardens of Iman. The next verses, there's two more verses and I will end on this. He mentions another beautiful verse in which he says about Muslims, right? Ma siwalla ra musalma. So it's not for a Muslim, right? Banda nest. Ma siwalla ra musalma banda nest. Without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what are we Muslims? Without deen, we are nothing. We are absolutely nothing. Pesh fir'aune sarash afkanda nest. A Muslim is not that individual who lays their head in front of Fir'aun, or who bows their head, right? Who bows their head and gives up their way in front of any Fir'aun. A Fir'aun here is again nakira in Farsi, which meaning any kind of zalim and oppressor. In the way that Imam Hussain stood high and did not give his head. Sardad nadar dast Yazid. Otherwise, what are we? Bandai without the deen. This is also a very beautiful, it's a deep verse, which we don't get time to go into in the final verse, which will bring me right to the beginning of my talk, inshallah. So Allama Iqbal ends his nazam with this. He says, Musa o Fir'aun, Shabbir o Yazid. So we take Musa and Fir'aun. So the 10th of Ashura, we know that the significance of the Psalm of 10th Ashura, and this is a sunnah by the way, confirmed sunnah, everybody, all of us here should be intending to fast on the 10th of Muharram. And this was the date that Musa al-Islam was saved, and his people, the Bani Israel, was saved from Pharaoh, the parting of the sea. Absolutely no doubt on the 10th of Ashura. So Musa o Fir'aun, Shabbir o Yazid, Eid o Quwwat. These two powers. So it said Musa o Fir'aun, Shabbir. Shabbir is the title of Imam Hussain. Shabbar and Shabbir. Shabbir and Yazid. So there's a contrast here. There's some beautiful metaphors in these verses we can't talk about right now. Shabbir or Yazid. These two powers, these two forces, as Hayat Ahmad Padid, have existed since the beginning of time. And what are these two forces? These two forces are about good and evil. This battle which took place, this sacrifice which Imam Hussain made, was not one just about a person. It was about good and evil. It was about truth and falsehood. It was about justice and injustice. It was about oppression and about freedom of the Muslims. And this is where I want to go back to the beginning of what I said. That today, you will hear people giving speeches in the month of Muharram, in which they will not even mention, there is no tadhkira at all of Imam Hussain. It's quite unbelievable. And I've heard one such myself, by the way, recently. And I was stunned that not one mention of Imam Hussain, but only the events of the Sawm of 10th Ashura, yes, it goes back to when Nuh alayhi salam's, the ark of Nuh alayhi salam met the shore. Musa alayhi salam, many events are important on the 10th of Ashura, which some say go back all the way to Adam alayhi salam, that when Adam alayhi salam was placed into Jannah, this was also the 10th of Ashura. So if you go all the way back to Adam alayhi salam, that this day has significance, we can't mention them all now, there's a long list of things that happened on the 10th of Ashura. Why is it that today that any Muslim would stop before Imam Hussain? In fact, the verse that Allama Iqbal says, he mentions Musa and Fir'aun, but then don't forget Shabir or Yazid either. Don't forget Shabir, because it's part of the same narrative of truth and falsehood, of justice and injustice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give myself the tawfiq and all of us here to learn from the life of Imam Hussain, to follow his footsteps and to increase our love for the Prophet's family, alayhi salatu wassalam. I will finally just end very quickly by mentioning one point of a very important maqala which I didn't get to discuss today, which was by Karimia al-Azhari on this particular topic. And again, he says the reason why we criticize Yazid so much and celebrate Imam Hussain so much is because this was a battle between Iman and Kufr. This is what is to remember. And he mentions the positions of all of the four madhab, and all of the four schools do not believe in the Iman of Yazid. There's a slight distinction between each of them. Do they mention he is a non-believer by name or by action? And what Pir Karim Shah says, and he gives the reference of Ibn Khallikan, Imam Ibn Khallikan, through Allama Hirasi, who was a class fellow of Imam Ghazali rahmatullah, student of Imam al-Haramain, Allama Hirasi, in which he mentions the position of all four madhabs that Yazid was not a mu'min. The difference is that some of them mention him by name, his kufr, and that he's cursed, and some of them don't. And he said when it comes to the Shafi'is, we only mention and curse him by name. This is the position of the Shafi'i school. But we take the lesson today that we don't busy ourselves with cursing, but we busy ourselves with sending salawat on the Prophet and his family. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ.
يعلى ابن مرة قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم حسين مني وأنا من حسين أحب الله من أحب حسينا الحسين ست من الأسباط. حضرت یعلا ابن مرہ رضی اللہ تعالیٰ عنہ روایت کرتے ہیں کہ آقا دو عالم صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم نے ارشاد فرمایا، اور اس حدیث کو ابن ماجہ نے اپنی صحیح کے اندر ذکر کیا، امام ترمذی نے ذکر کیا، امام احمد نے ذکر کیا، اور سارے محدثین نے اس حدیث کو صحیح قرار دیا ہے کہ آقا دو عالم صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم نے ارشاد فرمایا کہ حسین مجھ سے ہیں اور میں حسین سے ہوں، اور اللہ تعالیٰ اس سے محبت فرماتے ہیں جو امام حسین سے محبت کرتا ہے، کیونکہ امام حسین رضی اللہ تعالیٰ عنہ یہ اللہ کے رسول کے نواسے ہیں۔ اللہ رب العزت ہمیں اہل بیت کی محبت عطا فرمائے۔ یہ میں زیادہ دیر حائل نہیں ہوں گا، ایک دو باتیں۔ آج محرم شریف کے جو پروگرام نوٹنگھم میں شروع ہو رہے ہیں اس کا آغاز مسجد ابراہیم سے ہو رہا ہے۔ الحمدللہ اہل اسلام تشریف لائے، ہم ان کے شکر گزار ہیں، اور ہمارے درمیان اس وقت اس شہر کے بڑے چنیدہ لوگ تشریف لائے ہیں۔ ہم ان سب کا شکریہ ادا کرتے ہیں کہ وہ تشریف لائے ہیں، ہماری محفل کو عزت بخشی انہوں نے۔ بالخصوص اس وقت ہمارے ساتھ فخر القرہ، زینت القرہ، فخر السادات اور تلمیذ الشیخ عبدالباسط عبدالصمد الشیخ قاری سید صداقت علی تشریف فرما ہے، وہ تلاوت قرآن مجید فرمائیں گے۔ اس سے پہلے ایک مختصر سا اعلان کہ محترم ڈاکٹر مشرف حسین الازہری صاحب نے اس ماہ محرم میں ایک تحفہ، ایک کتاب کی صورت میں ہمیں دیا ہے، اور اس کتاب کا نام ہے جرنی ٹو اللہ۔ یہ خواجہ عبدالکریم رحمۃ اللہ علیہ کی کتاب ہے، باہر موجود ہے، تو یہ انگلش میں انہوں نے ترجمہ کیا ہے خواجہ عبدالکریم رحمۃ اللہ علیہ کی کتاب کا۔ दोस्त इसको ख़रीद कर डोनेट कर सकते हैं और अपने दोस्तों को ये बेहतर गिफ्ट दे सकते हैं। हम दुआ करते हैं कि अल्लाह रब्बुल इज़्ज़त डॉक्टर साहब को मज़ीद बेहतर काम करने की तौफ़ीक़ अता फरमाए। हमारी महफ़िल में दीगर हज़रात भी तशरीफ़ लाए। मेरे बड़े अच्छे और मोहतरम दोस्त जनाब ज़मीर कादरी साहब आए हैं, मैं उनको भी तहे दिल से खुशामदीद कहता हूँ। दीगर हज़रात टाइम नहीं है, मैं अर्ज़गुज़ार हूँ इज़्ज़त माब जनाब क़ारी सैयद सदाकत अली शाह साहब से कि वो कुरान मजीद की तिलावत से हमारे दिलों को मुनव्वर फरमाएं।
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا تقولوا لمن يقتل في سبيل الله أموات بل أحياء ولكن لا تشعرون ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين وبشر الصابرين وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة وبشر الصابرين وبشر الصابرين
ما شاء الله.
وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم ورحمة. وأولئك هم المهتدون.
أصحاب الهداية.
الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وقرن في بيوتكن ولا تبرجن تبرج الجاهلية الأولى وأقمنا الصلاة.
الله عليك يا سيدي. زادك الله زادك الله زادك الله.
وآتينا الزكاة وأطعنا الله ورسوله. وقرن في بيوتكن ولا تبرجن تبرج الجاهلية الأولى وأقمنا الصلاة وآتينا الزكاة وأطعنا الله ورسوله. ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت أهل البيت إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. ایک بار تو بات پڑھی شاہ ہست حسین بادشاہ ہست حسین شاہ ہست حسین شاہ ہست حسین بادشاہ ہست حسین دین است حسین دی پناہ ہست حسین سرداد نداد دست در دست یزید حقا کے بنا لا الہ ہست حسین حقا کے بنا الہ ہست حسین. مولا کائنات کی منقبت کی دوسرا شعر پیش کر رہا ہوں، اسی انگ میں پیش کر رہا ہوں. اہل نظر کی آنکھ کا تارا علی علی اور اہل وفا کے دل کا سہارا علی علی. آپ بھی کہتے ہیں اہل وفا کے دل کا سہارا علی 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 اہل وفا کے دل کا سہارا. رحمت نے لے لیا مجھے آروش نور میں، رحمت نے لے لیا مجھے نور میں جب بھی کبھی جو رو کے پکارا علی علی، جب بھی کبھی جو رو کے پکارا علی 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 علی، اہل نظر کی آنکھ کا تارا، ایک کیف ایک سرور سا رہتا ہے رات دن، ایک کیف ایک سرور سا رہتا ہے رات دن، جب سے ہوا ہے ورد ہمارا علی 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 علی، جب سے ہوا ہے ورد ہمارا علی 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 علی، جب سے ہوا ہے ورد ہمارا علی علی، دنیا میں سب سے اعلیٰ گھرانے کے نور ہو، دنیا میں سب سے اعلیٰ گھرانے کے نور ہو، اس واسطے ہے نام تمہارا علی 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 علی، اس واسطے ہے نام تمہارا علی علی۔ آدم یہ مغفرت کی سند ہے ہمارے پاس، آدم یہ مغفرت کی سند ہے ہمارے پاس، ہم ہیں علی کے اور ہمارا علی 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 علی، ہم ہیں علی کے اور ہمارا علی 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 علی، ہم ہیں علی کے اور ہمارا علی علی۔
بڑے خوبصورت انداز میں تلاوت قرآن مجید، اہل بیت کا ذکر، اور پھر قبلہ قاری صاحب سادات میں سے ہیں، اہل بیت کے اتحاد میں سے ہیں، تو ذکر جو ہے وہ اہل بیت کا ہو اور ان کے گھرانے کا فرض کرے تو کیا کہنے ہیں۔ دعا کرتے ہیں کہ اللہ رب العزت قبلہ قاری صاحب کو عمر خضر عطا فرمائے اور ان کے وجود کو مزید نفعآور بنائے۔ ابھی ہم بیٹھے ہوئے تھے تو مجھے ایک دوست نے میسیج کیا کہ ڈاکٹر صاحب کی جو کتاب ہے جرنی ٹو اللہ، اس کا ایک باکس جو ہے وہ میں ڈونیٹ کرتا ہوں۔ انہوں نے مجھے روکا ہے کہ میرا نام نہ لیا جائے، تو نام کے بغیر ہی میں ان کی دعا کو ہوں اللہ رب العزت ان کا یہ ہدیہ اپنی بارگاہ میں قبول فرمائے، اور وہ باکس باہر موجود ہے، جو کتاب لینا چاہے وہ لے جا سکتا ہے۔
This is a very, very, very bad practice. Really, very बुरी गल है कि
تو آپ
आस्था विच किताबां दित्तियां जान। Sorry, उस आफजी रहमतुल्लाह अलैहि की बेनती है, और nobody, you know, I've given free books to Boras. They refuse to take seriously. Doctor, honestly, they don't take it. They say, why should I take a book free? I'm going to enjoy. I'm going to learn. I love it. But I don't like this practice at all, to be honest, for people to give free. Yes, you buy it for your family and relatives and dosts. You give it to them, that's a different thing. As a gift, yeah, no? You give it. But I mean, bar satna kitaba, stop. No, I don't like that at all as an author. You know, I spent months and years on this. 25 saal ho gaye, 25 saal baad isme dobara si kar rahe. I know how much effort We don't want it to be, you know, ہمیں سپنا ہوتا ہے.
نہیں مقصد گفٹ دینا ہی ہے. یہ گفٹ ہے کتاب اس دوست نے.
انہوں نے کہا کہ اپنے دوستوں کو اسپیشل آپ کو نام لکھ کر دیں جائے. پلیز یو نو لیٹ اس ریسپیکٹ دس. یو نو کتاب الکتاب کے لیے باقی کتابوں کی بھی عزت احترام اس بندے نہ رہے ہیں. ضرور کریں. It has to be respected.
ڈاکٹر صاحب یہ
جو بیچتے بھی نہیں ہے. You know, alhamdulillah, I don't take a penny from any of these
ڈاکٹر صاحب
books.
ایک جو دوست بھی یہ کریں گے وہ گفٹ کریں گے
Oh, good.
تاکہ وہ پڑھیں.
But I just want to make sure you don't make this کہ ہم مفت میں دیتے ہیں.
نہیں
انہوں نے گفٹ دی ہے.
No, I understand that. But کوشش کریں. Let's be people who show that we are educated, literate people, love books, book lovers.
اس کا ایک اور آدمی ہے کہ جن لوگوں کو وہ گفٹ ملے گا وہ بھی کچھ ڈونیٹ کرنا.
ہاں یہ ضمیر صاحب نے بڑی اچھی تجویز دی ہے کہ جو یہ اس دوست کی طرف سے اس نے مجھے کہا کہ نام نہ میرا لیا جائے. تو انہوں نے کہا یہ ہاں یہ گفٹ کی صورت میں انہوں نے کتاب دی ہے سب کے لیے. تو آپ جو بھی دوست وہ کتاب لیں گے ضمیر قادری صاحب کی جو بات ہے کہ آپ بھی آگے پھر ڈونیٹ کریں اور گفٹ دیں آگے دوستوں کو
تاکہ لوگ
پڑھیں اس کو اور یہ روشنی پھیلتی چلی جائے. مقصد ہمارا یہی ہے, اس کے علاوہ اور کوئی مقصد نہیں ہے. اور دعا کرتے ہیں کہ اللہ رب العزت ڈاکٹر صاحب کو مزید صحت و عافیت عطا فرمائے.
السلام علیکم. جیسا کہ آپ نے آج ڈاکٹر صاحب سے سنا کہ پہلا پروگرام ہے جماعت اہل سنت کی طرف سے, تو کل کا جو پروگرام ہوگا وہ 5 days میں ہوگا. آپ سب احباب سے گزارش ہے کہ اسی محبت اور احترام کے جذبے کے ساتھ جو ہے وہ تشریف لائیے. تو کل 5 days میں ہوگا اور اس کے ساتھ وہاں پر بتا دیا جائے گا اگلا پروگرام کہاں ہوگا. بدھ کا پروگرام جو ہے وہ بابت مل کمیونٹی سینٹر میں انشاءاللہ.
اذان ہوگی انشاءاللہ, اس کے بعد نماز. اللہ اکبر اللہ اکبر اللہ اکبر اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ